everybody. Welcome to World Building. This is going to be World Building 101 for today, and I just want to let you know that because I don't know what kind of world building you came here for, but if you want some more in depth topics, we can do that at another time. So, if you did not know, I am Carrow Brown. I am an executive assistant over at Rippaverse. I write books and I do side editing when my schedule allows it. And if you did not know, I am the one speaking right now. This is the portrait that was done for me at work. So, moving on. So minor housekeeping, not that you guys can say anything right now, but if you have a question, if you can put it in the chat with a Q in front of it, then I will be able to answer it after the presentation. If at some point I happen to answer your question during the presentation, feel free to go ahead and scroll up, delete your questions so that way I can get through everybody in a timely manner. All right, so table of contents for world building, and I'm thinking more like fantasy genres or urban fantasy genres, but we can kind of play it by ear a little bit. But one of the thing, or rather four main things that I would encourage you guys to consider when you are doing any kind of world building, dipping your toe into it and all that, is you want to think about the history and lore of your society and your world in general, the society and the cultures within your world. There will be many because it is a world, and any kind of magic systems. Magic systems honestly deserves like its own presentation, so I'm really gonna kind of skim over that. If you've got questions
Beat you
about
to
that.
it.
Oh, you already did it? All right,
Oh,
cool.
you did it.
Somebody did it for me, so I'm just gonna do a quick recap on that and save everybody some time. And step 4 is going to be talking about trade and money. Two things I will not be talking about today because they're going to be covered by another presenter are going to be politics. So it was politics, and what was the other thing again?
Actually, he just did politics, so I was gonna take up the reins on cultures, but it looks like you're gonna give a cursory introduction to it. By the way, I might ask questions just as the host. That way, I'm not doing anything, but I'll keep it brief so you can continue.
Oh
If
yeah,
that's fine.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, this is more like a primer. All these things that we're going over today could easily be like their own presentations when it comes to creating, world building. All right, so history and lore, as you guys can see, when you guys are thinking about the history and lore of your world or your fantasy, whether it be urban fantasy, high fantasy, whatever fantasy, you want to think about the legends and myths. You want to think about any historical events. You want to think about the artifacts and the relics. Now, this also applies to like if you're kind of working within modern day stuff as well. And the nice thing about working with like kind of more like contemporary fiction is that all these things have been done for you, right? So we already have plenty of myth and legends. We have lots of historical events that we can do a little couple twists on because nobody can really agree what happened 50 years ago, right? And artifacts and relics, if you think about like King Arthur and Excalibur and stuff like that, that's already been laid out for you. But if you're not basing it off of an Earth kind of place, then these are things that you can think about and think about incorporating within, the kind of like the cultures and things like that. Remember that one of the big things about humans is that we are always naturally gravitated towards stories, myths, legends. Think about all the fables that we used to tell children in order to like make them either make good choices, help strangers, don't go into cauldrons run by witches that have houses made of candy, right? And that and all of that. Historical events you can kind of have a little bit of fun with because I kind of did my already tongue in cheek there by saying that nobody can really agree with what happened 50 years ago. So there's always a lot of debate when it comes to what has occurred over time. And if that's something that you kind of want to work into your story in order to cause conflict between two nations or two races or something like that, do it. Have at it. Have fun with it. Artifacts and relics are probably the one thing that I see a lot of ambitious authors wanting to make because we like stuff, right? We're kind of material with that. I know some of you recently were joining a reading group where you're reading Elric of El Mimine. I can never say it appropriately. But one of the relics that he had in that story was Stormbringer, right? Stormbringer, the cursed sword, but the sword that allowed him to XYZ. It was, and the fun thing about that particular relic and that storytelling kind of thing is that every time Stormbringer would be brought into the story, we'd always have like that one paragraph about Stormbringer and what Stormbringer was and all of that. So that was, uh, and the reason I want to bring that up is because if you guys are going to really be focusing on these things, find a way to incorporate them into your story. Don't spend a whole bunch of time on stuff that's not going to actually either be part of like the engagement or any of the background stuff or anything that you're going to be using whatsoever. I know some folks get like super ambitious and will spend like weeks trying to figure out, what happened for like a year in their world in XYZ. Societies and cultures. So I'm going to say the fun word, which is talking about diverse societies. And the reason I say it's a fun word is because it's kind of a semi-dirty word in the way that it's being used. We want diverse people at the table. We want diverse blah, 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 blah. But what that really means is that don't make carbon copies of one civilization from one place and put them in another, right? Think about the United States of America, where the culture of Texas differs from the culture of Florida, and how those two states differ from the culture that's in New York, right? Those are regional changes, even though those are technically within the same area, right? So that can be diverse in that system. When you guys are thinking about creating these different societies and these cultures, think about we'll talk about a little bit more with the trade and stuff like that. But think about, again, those fables that I talked about. And those fables tend to have like a unifying moral within them. And a lot of the guiding principles that kind of decide the way that the society is going to behave and react to others is going to have roots in those fables. And it's also going to have roots in their laws and things like that. So feel free to kind of explore that, play with that. If you are somebody that really enjoys working with political systems, go ahead and do that. If you like hierarchies and you want to work those in creative ways, go ahead and do that. Or if you're kind of like, no, I don't do that, down with the man, it's blah, 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 you can do that too. Remember, it's your world. You can do whatever you want with it. But whatever you do when you make these societies, create enough difference that it can cause, I want to call fun friction uh, between your various groups. An innocent example is the way that people like to talk about soda, right? We got soda, we got Coke, and we got pop, right? Everybody is talking about the same thing, but we all call it something different. And when you do that to one of the other groups, the first thing that they try and do be like, "What are you talking about?" Right? Fun little small differences like that. Play with it.
Can I interject in between slides here briefly?
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so it's important to remember, guys, that with each of these topics she's going to be covering, never be afraid to invoke creative freedom. However, use that sparingly and do not have your way with the audience's suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, they'll always call you out on that.
Yep.
Let's see. Okay, I kind of talked about that. So I know I'm going to talk about it again a little bit more on the following slide, but lots of locations wherever they decide to settle, they settled there for a reason, right? There was something that was probably there that they were like, yes, this is going to be ours, and we can use this either to create trade or promote trade, right? There has to be a reason for people to go there. Think about the Wild West when we were kind of expanding across the Americas. And in some places, we tried to settle and make, towns and things like that, but it didn't work out for various reasons. There wasn't enough food. There wasn't a reason for us to linger there. No gold, no whatever, right? So think about how you can have those people put in roots and why they put in roots. And you can make it for like religious reasons as well. Think about the Mormons and how they kind of basically took over, like, Arizona and all of that. Oh, there I could throw a rock and hit a Mormon out in Arizona. There's so many there. That's like their second capital. Let's see. Oh, I didn't mean to skip that. Conflict and integration. So yeah, I talked about this a little bit when I was saying find ways to have like those cultures like have those differences without, I guess, making it like, I don't know what the word I want to look for. I wrote these slides and I don't know what word I really want to do. Um, but okay, here's a fun example from when I was growing up in England. So obviously, even though Britain and America have English as a common language, they don't have common terminology, right? And when I used to live in England, one of the things that British people like to try and do, if they thought I was just fresh off the boat, as I like to say, is they would like to try and like throw me off with like the way that they would use their terms and things like that. They have a particular dish. It starts with an A and ends in an S, or no, starts with an F and ends in an S, and it really means Scottish meatballs, but in America it means two gay guys, right? And so they would
Wow.
usually like try and throw me by saying like, "Hey, would you like to have this word for dinner?" And I'm kind of censoring myself because I know this is going to go up on YouTube, and I don't want Kaine to get in trouble for that. They
I've
would
heard
also
this
do that
joke
with
before.
yeah, they would also do that with cigarettes, and then they'd be like, "Hey, do you want some toads for dinner?" You know, and it was like their way of knowing that because I didn't quite speak like the local dialect that way, that they would like to try and trip me up for like their own amusement, right? So, yeah, and that was just like a thing that British people like to do to me. Now, on the other hand, like, there were some words like shag, for example, right? Like shag in America is not really a bad word, but in Britain, it's a super taboo word. You never mention it. It's like the word that you don't say. And what was funny is that when I first moved to England, Austin Powers, The Spy That Shagged Me, had just come out. And so I would go around and ask people if they had seen that movie. And it was so funny to watch their reaction when I would say like the full title. But again, at that time, I didn't fully know. My dad had to tell me not to say that word. um, so there was that. So yeah, so you can either think about having cultural differences where they kind of like to rib each other like that or cut it up a little bit, or where that cultural difference can be kind of hostile. And when I mean about hostile, I'm thinking about like China and Japan. I'm also thinking about France and England. So those are two countries that, even though they might be on good terms right now, have a very bloody history. And you'll run into a lot of Chinese people who really hate Japan just because of what happened during World War II. And they're not shy about talking about it. They really aren't. So those are things that you can kind of think about if you, in your historical events, want to talk about if there's any kind of like civil war or a wider war or anything else like that, what the long-reaching consequences of that are going to be.
I do want to add to this once you're done, but I'd go ahead.
Yeah, and then another kind of long cultural effect that might happen from one of your historical events is if you go to Germany and you talk to them about World War II, they always say, "We're very sorry about World War II." Like, that's just an immediate response that they all have. They're very apologetic about it, even though they weren't there and they didn't do anything. But there you go. What's your thing?
This aspect and inevitability, frankly, is slowly being erased from storytelling, uh, namely RPGs. A lot of groups find this aspect of blending multiple cultures together distasteful, but what they don't understand is that eliminating it completely is destructive to storytelling and completely destroys any historian's suspension of disbelief. Or even if you're not even a historian, if you're even the slightest bit aware of cultural differences or world history, um, it's gonna leave a very sour taste in your mouth whenever everyone just seems to be getting along no matter where they go. Even a lot of stories contradict themselves with this because there are documented conflicts within the mythos, but for some reason, no one ever seems to have any bad blood with each other. There's no slurs. There's no, there's no mention of the bitter history that these particular cultures share. And yeah, just be aware of that. It's not very conducive to immersion or any semblance of a cohesive story, in my opinion. But yeah, that's all I had to add about that part.
Yeah, and I think on that, since we're talking a little bit about culture, and I don't want to dive too much because I know you're going to do a longer presentation about it, but another example for you guys to think about, like at a more micro level, is I want to say small town folks versus big town folks, people in the country versus people in the city, right? And I went to go visit some family in Georgia, and I was talking to one of my, I guess we'll call them legion of relatives, and they told me about how they went to actually the city that I was living in, and they thought that everybody there was super rude. And so I asked her, why did you think everybody was rude? And she's like, well, I was trying to talk to somebody when I was at the grocery store and standing in line, and they just stared at me. And so I had to explain to her, like, in that part of the city, if you just randomly start talking to strangers, you're a weirdo, right? Like, you just don't do it. And so, she didn't understand, but I told her it's like it's really weird for me coming from there and standing in line, and suddenly like this grandma lady turns around and starts talking to me about her grandkids and showing me pictures. And like, I've never met this person before. And by the time she left, I knew everything about her grandkids. Her name was Rebecca, and that she was about to go to a birthday party. Like, that was like so bizarre for me, but that was normal for there. So those are small things that you guys can play with on that. One of the big things I always find that's overlooked when it comes to world development is how do these people make money, right? And it's a big reason why a lot of cities kind of settle where it is, or where they end up settling, because they either going to settle by a port, they're going to settle in a place that's got a resource, or they're going to settle somewhere where there might be a trade stop, right? So people might need to rest. They found that this was a good place to rest before they moved on to the next venture. Enough people decided to linger, and that's kind of like how you can have small towns between larger cities form. Ports tend to be pretty large because you've got trade coming in from the sea, and they're coming in to rest and restock their supplies before they continue on with their journey, kind of thing. And then you've got some towns that might be like, I don't know, like in mountains or closer to farms where they have the resources, right? They've got the minerals, they've got the food, or in some cases they've got like the livestock, right? Like they've got all of that. So think about that. Think about what your trade routes are going to look like. Think about how close they're going to be. Think about why they might be far apart, right? Maybe there will be trade routes through the mountain ridge that might be closer together, those stopping points, because there's less air. People need to rest and make sure that their lungs adapt to the thinning air as they go further up. Versus when they have to go through flat lands, and all you have to do is just basically get used to the fact that everything's flat and there's no trees, right? Another fun thing that you could do is you can work with currency and the currency exchange. A fun example that I have is that there was a story that I read recently. It was called "He Who Fights with Monsters," and they've got a couple. The currency system in there is pretty in depth. If you've got like, I don't know, 26 hours to spend, it's a very long audiobook. It's a really thick book as well. They spend a lot of time actually talking about this particular topic, the trade and time is money and stuff like that. But the guy that basically kind of shows up into this world, they're called spirit coins. So you've got actual currency and you got spirit coins. But what was really funny is that because he wasn't actually from that world, when he would grab a spirit coin because he wasn't native to the area, he would actually make the coin look like his face, right? So he would offer this coin to people and they all thought it was counterfeit. So that was fun. And you can play with stuff like that too. Let's see. But in terms of the rate, there's always going to be a rate because the way that people value things isn't going to be the same. So, like in your more far away from city regional areas, they're probably going to want to trade like, the way it used to be. Like, I'll give you like, some bread if you fix my the shoe on my horse and stuff like that. Or it could be maybe a city doesn't value gold, right? That always throws people for a loop when it's like, okay, well, there's one gold coin. It's like, we don't use gold here. Like, what else do you got, right? If the fun example for the non-gold, if you guys are Trekkies, is actually from Deep Space Nine, or Deep Sleep Nine, as I like to affectionately call it, when there was an episode when Quark was trying to chase some hidden treasure that was out in the space verse somewhere, and he went out and he finally found it, and it was just gold, and he was so upset because gold to Ferengis is completely worthless, so he just had a tantrum at the end of that episode, and I always loved it quite a great deal. And let's see what else we got here. Just checking. So anything that involves money is always going to have a group of people that are involved with it. So if you take a look down here on the bottom where I'm talking about guilds, merchants, alliances, and stuff like that, those will form. Why they form is going to be up to you, right? So do they form to regulate trade and stop people from doing counterfeiting? Do they trade because they want to ensure the quality of a product? Or do they end up forming together because they're trying to kind of put their feet in the ground when it comes to maybe some political thing that's going on?
I
Right?
did this right. I'm actually pleased. I actually
Yeah,
did this correct.
you did.
I'm
Yeah.
surprised.
Yep. And if you guys want like some fun examples, so I've always been super interested in the way that people conduct themselves online and inside of video games, especially with MMOs, because the restrictions on there of society kind of are lifted, so people get a little extra cutthroat. And one of the things I thought was interesting 2 years ago was that there was actually on a server in World of Warcraft, there was an alliance of crafters, right? And if you were not in the alliance of crafters and you tried to sell something and shout or something like that, and they didn't have you on there, like they would go for you. And when I mean go for you, I don't mean like they would go for you in game. I mean they would find you out of game and like find a way to get your account banned. It was absolutely ridiculous. Like I heard about that something crazy. And then who was another one? There was, I don't think they were trade, but they were definitely a corp back in Eve. So everybody against everybody, the space game. I don't know if you guys play this. I'm going really far into the nerd geekness, so please forgive me for a minute. But what was really interesting is that there was one particular corp that controlled a large section of space, and nobody could go in there and mine anything, right? And they were particularly d-bags about it because might is right philosophy there. And so what happened is a bunch of people paid this outside group to basically infiltrate this corp, right? 6-month process, by the way. They infiltrated the corp. They found all of the clones by all of the leadership and all of their bases, and in one concise strike, blew up all the clones, drew up all the blew up all the players, all the resources, everything. Stations gone, like absolutely gone in one day. And the thing about Eve is that when you lose your clones and your ship and everything, you're just floating out in space. And when you resurrect, you've got literally nothing, right? And that's in a freaking video game. And it was because they wouldn't let go of like this section of space that they were just, being hard asses about. So if it happens in video games, think about what it can happen in real life, right? So more stuff for you guys to think about. All right, so that was my primer on world building. I see that there are 2 questions here. How would you like to do these questions, sir?
Huh. I expected it to be longer.
No, I figured there would be more back and forth because everybody is got like their different genres. So I wanted to open the floor for more discussion this time around.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. First person to request to speak was Black. There we go. Oh wait, what's your question? Did you write it?
Yeah, I put in the thing and I added it to myself like you said.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Let me see. Questions. So one question I have is,
It's better if I say it because I don't know if I wrote it out properly, but
I'm willing to listen.
the main gist. Okay, the main gist of it is I don't know if you've ever seen a show called Fully Cooley.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, great show.
One, it's a great show. I don't like the sequel too much, but the point though is it's a great show. And after watching it and watching the interview of the person who did it, I wanted to know because Venom knows I'm very into a more interracial play with characters because I'm trying to work story angles where race and culture don't necessarily smack around too much in the stories the way that they make it look like it does in current media.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I'm setting up is a semi-futuristic world where you have humans, maybe some aliens, and the main cast is like a black boy, white boy, Asian girl, um, cat maybe, and they end up meeting this robot that is from some star system. So trying to work these characters together, I'm trying to see if race or cultural differences would necessarily play a major dynamic in this story. And if it's needed to be seen in the story, is there a way to do it without it becoming like, over bloated or in your face?
That really depends on how you want to kind of approach it. I mean, it's going to be toned up or toned down as much as you want. When you are describing that premise to me, it makes me think of Expanse. And I would recommend reading the book over the show because in the show they really overhype those differences that you're talking about. But the book was a bit more laid back. In the book, when they were talking about the cultural differences, it was very regional, right? It was Mars versus Earth, and Mars and Earth versus the Belters, so the people on the belt, right? And even then, like the big grievance that the Belters had was the fact that they didn't have a lot of air, they didn't naturally have water, and they had to get all of their food from Earth, right? And in some cases it wasn't rationed out appropriately and it caused problems, right? So in that situation, you're looking at a demographic of people who just want to exist. They're born out in space, which was really fun to read because the people who were born out in space, because they didn't have gravity to kind of like keep their bodies down so much, like they were super always like defined as tall, right? So they would walk into a room and have to like dip in to not hit their heads on like doors made for earthers and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I would recommend that book and maybe get some inspiration from it. But they actually had a really interesting scene in there that you might like, and it was when the entire crew was sitting at a table, and so the crew composed of an Earther, a Belter, somebody from Mars, actually another Belter who was a detective trying to figure out what was going on, and they were literally talking about like why there was so much friction with everybody trying to get along, and it was everything from what I kind of talked to you about right down to like trying to communicate appropriately.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Whew. Sorry about that. No, something had caught my eye by the side glance, so I missed that last part. I do apologize.
Oh, there's a book. Your homework is a book for the
Right.
Expanse. It's called Leviathan Wakes. You would like it.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Leviathan Wakes?
That's what it's called. Yeah.
That sounds way too familiar to me, but I'll type that down. Why?
Okay. It's
To
good.
add
I recommend it.
to add to her answer, since this is a post-apocalyptic world, depending on when the apocalypse is actually happening, beginning, middle, end, a lot of the cultural beef, for lack of better words, that existed before the apocalypse would be very diluted due to the current problem that might be happening.
I mean, there's some tribalism that might go on, but you're gonna find a lot of people want like
But
really
yeah,
basic things like water.
So,
it'll be under a different lens and context than what would constitute current day. But yeah, she's right.
okay, so I do have a follow up question, but that'll come up later. I just want to leave one little note for when I get the next chance to speak.
Hmm.
Yep.
The Walking Dead was kind of a good reference to what I was trying to aim for in a way, but
Yep.
I think that's kind of what I was mostly suggesting because of the situation. It's like race is kind of like not important. But I'll hold that till the next time I'm allowed to speak because someone else is going.
Okay.
So
One thing to kind of maybe put into perspective, because you're referring to the Great Equalizer, and the Great Equalizer in modern psychology terms actually refers to war. So when war happens, the things that usually that we care like the differences that we care about suddenly don't matter because it's like the only thing we need you to do is stand next to us and hold up your rifle kind of situation,
oh yeah, yeah,
right?
for sure.
Yeah. So that yeah, they call war the great equalizer. So in this case, if you have a threat that's big enough, right, to make people not care, then a lot of them may not care. But in some situations, you may find people who are exceptionally frustrated when they take their anger out on somebody might bring up like some of that stuff. But
Yeah.
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 No, I know, and thank you for reminding me about that phrasing because I remember the Great Equalizer. There was something that was mentioned as a weapon that was known as the Great Equalizer. I don't remember what it is,
Firearms.
but what happened?
Firearms is what you're thinking of.
Oh yeah, wait, wait, yeah, I think that might be it. Yeah, I think that might be it, or the nuke. I can't remember. But thank you, and again, I will come back when I get the chance. Thank you, Miss
Mm-hmm.
Carroll, and thank you, Venom.
You're welcome. Final point. Depend again, referring to when the apocalypse, like what state it's in. This is leaning more towards post-apocalyptic. In certain media, you'll find that fantastical racism does show up again. In Fallout, you have the super mutants. So a lot of people don't like them. You have the ghouls in Fallout as well. A lot of humans don't trust them for various reasons. D&D, you have the orcs, or really, it can be orcs, dwarves, or elves, really, but it'll show up again eventually. But using the context of your story, it'll be more allegorical and less direct and on the nose. So you'll still be able to portray it, but it won't be in a way that ruins immersion for the story. That's why the society and cultures bit from her presentation was still very relevant, because you can execute that without referring to real world races and countries and such. But we're going to go ahead and take the next question from Lime. My second story will show an alternate history where instead of Christianity, there is the religion of the god King blah blah, and the basis is a nihilistic view on humans where they should only do useful acts, and anything that doesn't contribute to the state is a sin. But so far, the only examples I have come up with are expressing this through dialogue. Any other ideas, like a public preacher or something, maybe? That's a good idea.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of Kino. So I always refer to other media if you guys are interested, just because that's a universal way that people in publishing games and movies usually talk. But there was an episode in Traveling with Kino, or was it Kino's Journey? That's what it was called. It was an anime from like forever ago. There was two. There was one that was done with CG, and there was one that was done just animation style. But in the one that was done with the animation, there was one episode where it was like you have to work, right? And if you're not working and contributing, then you kind of get penalized by the system. And there was another country that Kino went to where the your ability to contribute depended on how much stress that you went through. It was an interesting dichotomy there, but with the one about like you must be useful and you must provide, there are a couple things that you could do is you can make up like those posters, right? Because think about, I mean, you're talking about Christianity, so think about like how Christianity has kind of worked into some of the subtle things that go on. The Pledge of Allegiance has, a reference to that. A lot of the laws that are, originally created are done within Christian values and things like that. So take a look at how your laws are made, for example, and make sure that those laws are shaped in a way that follows this particular principle. So you must do something that is useful. So how is murder useful? Is murder not useful? If it's not useful, why is it not useful? One thing that so way back in the Roman Empire. Do you guys think about the Roman Empire, by the way? Like how? I'm just curious. But in the Roman Empire, they used to be, very a strong pagan, going on, right? And at one point, they all became Christians. Now, they didn't become Christians because they, found the Messiah or anything else like that, but they became Christians because it's really hard to tax people who are dead. And one of the things that would happen within the pagan faith is that they would do human sacrifices. So, in order to stop them from doing that, they basically say, now we are going to all become this, and we are also going to make sure that you can't just kill people that, we could potentially tax. So, things like that. Not a lot, all the time. Okay, perfect. Good. Thank you for answering my informal question about the Roman Empire. It's really important to me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'll answer it. The people who ask that question think about the Roman Empire far more than anyone who'd be able to answer the question. That said, though, I do bring them up a lot. I think I already answered this for you on Twitter. Now, I bring them up a lot because during philosophical discussions, 9 times out of 10, the Greeks or the Romans already covered the topic. So I'm like, the Romans already covered this. Why are people still having this terrible idea? So.
Yeah, no, I'm just asking because I guess Lois Eaters did a video where they talked about Romans think about the Roman Empire, men think about the Roman Empire all the time. And I asked my husband, and he was like, yeah, I think about it every day. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I asked my other guy friend, he was like, I never think about, why are you asking me this question?
Yeah, your husband was fucking with you. he was messing with you.
No, I asked him today. I was like, hey, when it came to the Roman Empire, what did you think about it? He's like, oh, I thought about like the best way to keep the house safe because I don't want barbarians to come in and take my wife. So we're going to make sure the firearm is right here just in case.
He is messing with you. He probably knows about the Roman Empire because most men do. I'm pretty sure a lot of us grew up wanting to read about the Spartans and other classical civilizations in their militaries, but I'm pretty sure he's just playing along because it's funny.
All right. Do we have another question?
Damn it. I was gonna actually add to. Oh yes, to add to Lime's question. There should definitely be a character in your story that learns how to bend the rules, like a defector. Like kind of like a Bad Batch style character, similar to the protagonist of Catch 22. Also, great case studies for what you're trying to execute: Warhammer 40K and Fallout New Vegas, especially the propaganda angle you're trying to use. There's several factions in Fallout that have the propaganda that you're suggesting, but it seems like The one you have is more like a uniparty government of some kind. So I guess I'd add 1984 to that list and any other dystopian story that features a one world government. Catch 22 actually features Catch 22 actually features a one world government. So yeah, add that to the list. I can't believe it. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, because you got the Hunger Games, you've got 1984, you got Fahrenheit 451, and you got Big Brother. Yeah, those are all about singular governments, and they're all the way that they kind of maintain control over the masses differ, but it's interesting.
Yeah, the main protagonist of Catch 22 has gotten pretty good at finagling the system using its contradictory and convoluted set of rules. Somehow it still works out for him. He's in a constant state of being on the fence, which gives him both benefits of each without any of the drawbacks. So, moving on from that, though, I think Black had a second question.
I'm ready.
Black, what's your second question?
Is it in regard to the Roman Empire?
I see a second Q, but I don't know what that means. Okay, I'll let you elaborate on it while I go use the restroom. I'll be right back.
Oh, sorry, I did not type it. I actually was so quick to answer your question, Ms. Carrow, about yes. You understand why. This actually relates to a video I just saw, and then I'll get to my question just to cover your bases. There was a time where the Roman Empire was trying to conquer another nation, and they were failing miserably. So what they did was they appropriated the quote concept of warfare as far as like the metal used by the enemy to build up their swords, which became very, very famous. You know, the short, long sword kind of concept that Romans use in battle. With
the glacius, yeah, I have one.
Yeah, it's like it got really popular with them, and because of that, and because of their armies, and because of their battle tactics, they were able to shift the entire changing field of warfare in their favor. And because they are so naturally prone to the id of human beings when it comes to like war, you know, power of the multitude and the masses, controlling the masses, doing as they did with the masses, from everything from, I'm not even gonna flow it out there because actually I remember that's the darker spectrum of things. I don't like going too deep.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a very prominent, very all-powerful in a sense kind of society. It's one of the reasons why they are the makeup for
That horn is all powerful.
Yeah, I don't know what.
Somebody got in an accident. That's what it sounds like. Oh, you're fine.
I missed everything and had nothing to add, so I thought I'd come in and inject some humor.
Oh, it works. We were talking about the Roman Empire, so I was super pleased.
Did he ask his question?
No, he didn't. He was talking about Roman Empire.
Hey, look, I'm sorry about that. One, that horn is Venom, and I honestly just mentioned it because, again, Rome literally was him in society. I mean, he fed people to lions, for Christ's sake.
Ritter, I will delete. Hey, they gave him a fighting chance. I will delete your. I will delete that.
One dude who apparently pulled off like a whole bunch of miracles. It's amazing. But to the point though, I don't want to stay too long in case somebody has a question, because I did have a third question I want to save for later. So when you mentioned the power, well, I didn't see much of the magic system. I do.
Stop looking out the window.
All right then. So societies and cultures. This relates to something I've just recently been doing because of Fire Emblem 3 Hopes and 3 Houses, which has been a very
3 horns. I'm sorry.
game for politics and how kings and groups work. One thing I've noticed is that they all carry the same monetary system, which is really weird. But I noticed that their society differences do play a role as far as like trading and everything else goes. So one thing I'm trying to one thing I'm trying to work through is that when it comes to some of my stories, I'm trying to build in a mixture of like certain things that might work like as a secondary means of like 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 making a certain like a sale on things. Kind of like if you're in a game and you have gold coins and silver coins and bronze coins, but there are certain traders that are they'll sell you this if you give them like some sort of like legendary thing. So what I guess I was asking was, are there any good like fantasy concepts that would work for like other trading outside of gold coins?
That one book I talked about, He Who Fights with Monsters, they have regular coins and then they've got like spirit coins. And the reason the spirit coins have more value is because when you use them in a certain way, they cause certain effects, right? So if somebody wants something, there has to be something in that thing that's worth trading, right? So the reason coins were kind of considered to have value for the longest time is because the stuff that they were made from was given value, right? But if you're talking about like a magic system or anything else like that, you could have a resource where let's see. You remember? Well, I mean, they didn't use it as a trading item, but I'm thinking about Full Metal Alchemist, where they had the soul gems and stuff like that. That's not what they were called. But they had like the red gems, and the homunculi really wanted them because in eating them, it made them very powerful. Right? So they were willing to do things for it.
The false philosopher stones.
Yeah, false philosopher stones. Yeah. So um, that's something that you can kind of take into account, and in other cases, it could have a spiritual value, right? So, and I'm thinking about Catholicism when it comes to the bread that they keep within the church, right? Because to a lot of people, they're like, those are just crackers, right? But to Catholics, those are not crackers. That's like the blood of Jesus, or sorry, the body of Jesus. And in some cases, like, priests have run into burning churches to go save that kind of thing. So consider the effect of the thing, consider the value that is placed onto it, why it might have that value. And I don't know, are you doing this in space or is this just fantasy?
I don't think it's fantasy per se. It's a sci-fi post-apocalypse.
That was for that was for Venom. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
What I do?
Then
Huh?
it's then oh well, if you're talking about like the end of the world, like the one thing people so no okay, like I'll be real with you guys. The end of the world comes, nobody's gonna care about dollar bills or quarters, right? They're gonna care about
No.
cans of food and they're gonna care about water, right? So that would be a form of trade that you could consider. Book of Eli actually depicted that really well. If you guys have seen that movie,
Yep.
where at one point Eli is in like the semi pawn shop and he's trying to trade off what he's got for water.
Also, if your story is leaning more toward a post-apocalypse, you have a robot companion featured in your story, so scrap is going to be very valuable to your party in particular. Think batteries, heat sinks, motherboards, whatever parts your robot has. Like
Come loose.
there you go. Yeah, screws. Like likely other people will want that too if robots companions are common. So think scrap, like any sort of technology would be useful. Batteries, general survival gear. Flashlights, canteens, any
Baseball
sort
with
of.
wire wrapped around it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, baseball bats, of course. Like any of that, any sporting goods, military gear of any kind. Just blankets. Like, just think of anything. But Fallout actually depicted this very well as well. They actually had a semi-currency that sprang into being. It was the bottle caps. So you could have something like that be a currency, like washers. Like washers could be a currency because they're usually found holding screws in place or bolts in place or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you could get creative with it. Screws itself could be a currency, but think along the lines of things that people need to survive. Also, anything that they need for security.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of guides on what you could possibly use in post-apocalyptic settings as well.
Yeah, there's so I say this with some hesitance because this isn't the target group for this book series I'm about to recommend. But there's uh there's a series. It's called the Resurrection Chronicles, and it's a romance genre. But the interesting thing that I've always really enjoyed about reading this particular series is that it's clear that while the author is trying to depict women getting together with like otherworldly men kind of situation, she did a lot of thinking about what would happen if the world ended, and so she depicted a whole bunch of situations from people who were caught at ground zero, one person that ran into a bunker shelter and how they basically like held up in there for like almost a year, and all of that. And again, uh, I know it's a romance genre, but if you got like some money and you don't mind reading about chicks getting with dudes and stuff like that, there's some good tidbits in there that you might be able to get as well. See a question. What is this question?
I can read it. He says it relates to isekai.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't know if he was gonna unmute himself or not. He's here.
No.
I'm sorry, I thought I was unmuted. So I
No.
was waiting.
Yeah.
You know
No.
what? I blame Ritter for this. Long story cut short, always up to something, Ritter. But yeah, long story cut short, that was kind of like my last, I think, related question.
Mhm.
But and it wasn't related mostly to this, but it was something for story related understanding. So recently, I have been having this back and forth with a bunch of like story concept developers because isekais have a certain level, at least certain modern day isekais have a certain level of this more the character is quote set kind of route, and they usually mostly just like slightly change because of a power upgrade, but they're usually the same.
Mhm.
But I know a lot of people sometimes they talk about how character development is important, but
Okay.
at the same time it's like you have certain comics where it's like you have a character and they literally are OP from the get.
Mhm.
And it's like whatever they were or whatever they develop into is almost not even there. It's kind of like a character that's playing through a game, and that character is kind of, I guess you could say, a semi, like kind of like a Link or like a main MC character you make kind of character, and
Mhm.
everything they do almost doesn't really shift the world, so much as it just progresses the story. So
Mhm.
one thing I just wanted to know was when it comes to isekai, is there always a need for like a character development in the sense of like them being kind of like a change like dramatically or introspectively or anything like that, or can a story work with just a character just being quote unquote, I guess you could say, two-dimensional, I guess, and just kind
Mhm.
of like working through their story as is?
Mhm. So you're referring to the character arc that can be in a story, and just for the general group here, there are three kinds of character arcs within stories. You have the negative story arc, which is most Chinese stories. They start in a good place and it goes downhill, like all their friends are dead, and they're just kind of like, things are terrible, and life lesson is suffering, blah blah blah. You've got your upward character arc, which everybody's pretty acquainted with. You got your underdog in a bad place and struggles against the whatever foe and comes out a better place through the power of friendship, shit like that. And
Uh,
then you have your neutral character arc, which is the character does not change because the world around that character is changing. It's not unheard of to do it. In fact, the most common example is actually going to be Batman for that because Batman doesn't really ever change, but everything around Batman changes, right?
ooh,
So
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, Batman doesn't
Yeah.
change. Punisher doesn't change. In the anime sphere, we can look at Saita Man, right? One Punch Man, he doesn't change. Overlord, the main character from there, he doesn't change either. But I will say throughout like the whole arc, like the way he does change, at some points he's kind of like aware of it, and then he's like, whatever, and then like keeps going, right?
Okay,
So.
so I didn't mean to cut in, but I want to make sure I didn't lose this. So
Mhm.
that's a good example of what I mean in a sense, because when it comes to things like Overlord or Skeleton Knight or even that one with the slime person and everything, it's like you have these isekais now where these characters are technically like blank slates, but they're almost OP from the persona to them. It's like when you get into their stories, like off the boat, it's like you have a guy who literally is the strongest mage in the world. You have a guy who is I forgot what the last one you just said was about Overlord.
One Punch
You
Man.
have you know what? Actually, no. Saitama is actually a good example.
Yeah.
You have Saitama. It's not an isekai, but it's a good example in a sense. You have Saitama, and he's literally a dude who, quite frankly, can't be beat. So you do have these characters who, quote unquote, are, I guess you could say, as they are from the get go, and they just go through the world, and yeah, the world does change because of their actions, or the world is changed because of their actions, but the characters themselves don't change. So I guess my full point question was just, is this good story writing in a sense? Because you mentioned the negative story arc, upward story arc, and the neutral character arc. So
Mm-hmm.
I would assume these are in the neutral character arc categories.
Yeah,
Does this
because
make them bad characters,
no, I
or in
mean,
your perspective?
so it really depends on the story and how you want to tell it. I mean, you can, uh, outside of Matt Walsh, who hates anime, I haven't really met anybody who hated One Punch Man, right?
Matt Walsh.
And yeah, he's from Daily Wire. They made him watch One Punch Man, and he wanted, like, he just hated himself. And I was very sad. But
No, never mind. No, never mind. Never mind.
oh.
Never mind.
But part of the reason
$1,000.
part of the reason Matt Walsh, not Matt Walsh, sorry, I'm a little tired. The reason One Punch Man was actually super successful the way that it was because of the way that they did the delivery, right? It was funny. It was taking established tropes and it was smashing them, and like things that we were kind of tired about seeing in anime were just getting completely obliterated, right? Like, so villain is like monologuing and, like, you know, Saitama standing there being like, "Are you done? Like, can we fight now?" Right? Stuff like that. Um, you could almost say
True.
you could almost say that Goku is actually a neutral art character because Goku doesn't really change, right? Like, he gets stronger, he learns new techniques, but at what point does Goku actually change? The answer is he doesn't, right? And I know I'm not using isekai references, but I'm using neutral character references. And
Yes.
one, yeah, so Overlord, One Punch Man, Goku, and all of that, one of the things that they have in common is they're working with a concept that is interesting that makes the reader want to go, I wonder how that will work. And a lot of the side investments, so two other examples might be Goblin Slayer and kind of Rise of the Shield Knight,
Yes.
is that we become invested in, like, the side characters and kind of like their journey along with the main characters. So they, in some ways, they're kind of carrying the story that way. But because of the
Yes.
relationship that the main character does have with these side characters, it makes us still like that main character a little bit.
Yes.
So no, it's not bad
Honestly,
storytelling.
No.
okay then. So honestly, that was some sort of example I was trying to explain to a person, mostly because I don't know if I'm saying the proper phrasing of it right or whatnot. But yeah, yeah, that's something I really wanted to know because with isekai stories, it is hard to kind of like write an isekai, mostly because of how the concepts of them now are very, very. It's like mostly you want to see how the story plays out, I guess. So that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
reasons why it is. You know what? I'm gonna step off for right now, because I think someone else is coming. I'll pick up something else afterwards if you're still here.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, again, thank you, Miss Carroll, because that really does help me understand some of what I'm doing.
Oh, Miss Outstanding, I'm glad I could help. Okay, what's next? DK has a question.
I'll bring him up after I elaborate on this point. Black, for your story, well, first, change is a sliding scale, right? Something in the story should change, like she had the world being an example. Aspects of the character can change as well. Although, if you're having a neutral character progression, um, it doesn't have to be a drastic change, right? So she gave Goku as an example. His overall character and who he is as a person doesn't change, but he does go through changes in the story. Like, for example, the first time he went Super Saiyan, that is somewhat of a change. And I see aspects of things like that in another anime, Kenichi the Mightiest Disciple. I see aspects of that anime in your story as well, in particular, Black, because you describe your main protagonist in the story I think you're talking about as being very weak, but he's very good at other things. He's good at using his brain, but part of his character progression could also be that he acquires skill to make him more effective in battle, not necessarily through strength. Someone like him would be more of a finesse style rogue type character if you decided to go that route, and he could recruit others to do the heavy lifting, both literally and figuratively, for him. So try to play around with that idea in your head as well. Who else? Ritter raised his hand first, so I'll bring him up, but I don't see a question for him. Hopefully you can elaborate once he's up here. Ritter, you have the floor. I didn't see it in the chat. Go ahead and ask it.
Hang on, my freaking settings are just... All right, there we go. There I am.
Wait, where'd the stream go?
I wrote
I turned it off. Do you need it back?
Yeah. Just for the recording. Go ahead.
Okay. So my world is just like a alternate version of America, not much is different. And I couldn't really think of anything, so I just wrote down the first thing that came to my head. How do I make it not sound like a rant about everything that's wrong with current America?
You're gonna have to do.
I have a bad habit of doing that sometimes, and I'll write something and I'll think, oh, okay, this is cool. This sounds funny. Then I'll go back and look at it. Like, no, that's not funny. That's stupid.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, you're suffering from the same thing activists are right now. So that's gonna require a lot of work.
I am getting better because I recognize my mistakes and I get rid of them.
I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with allegory. Surely there's some way you can deliver this that isn't so on the nose. I kind of want to ask more directly what you're trying to depict, just so we can see if we can get you a Trojan horse in which to deliver this in storytelling. Maybe Trojan horse is a poor use of words or poor choice of words, but you know what I mean.
Hey, it worked. It worked for the Trojans.
Well, I guess vehicle would be a better one. Whatever.
So what's your opinion on it, Carrow?
So that's usually called, I can't remember, there's a term for it because it actually happens so often within the author sphere that they give it its own little term. But it's basically where you get to hear the moral lecturing from the author through the story or the narration and stuff like that. Two books right off the top of my head that come to mind, rather two series, I should say. One is it's the Iron Druid Chronicles by Kevin Hearn. He had a little bit of social grandstanding, and in his first 4 books, it was kind of like, shrug, whatever. It was part of the character, right? And then something happened in the 5th book, and I don't know if he drank the Kool-Aid or what, or if his wife started writing the books for him. But the lecturing and the finger wagging got like to the point where people stopped reading, right? So it's one thing when it's kind of like a character quirk, or it's just like part of like their characterization, but it's another when people really do feel like it's the author intruding to share a personal opinion. Another example is actually going to be so that one book series I referred to earlier with the spirit coins, He Who Fights with Monsters. The main character, Jason, really likes to talk about Marxist and socialism things, like to the point where somebody says, well, you're going to talk to noble so-and-so. And literally the entire story stops because either I don't believe in nobles because I believe it's an outdated blah, blah, blah. Goes on forever, right? And what really sucks is that he's the main character, and he did that like to the point where I was like, I want this guy to die, right? Like that was just how often it happened. And the one saving grace is that at one point in the story, people started basically saying his spiel for him and calling him out on it. He was like, okay, maybe I should stop, right?
You think?
Yeah, no, but I mean, it was just like kind of it was semi addressed in the story, but I also got like kind of like the thought that like maybe a beta reader said like you need to chill it, right?
It's almost like a
Um,
lampshade, though. The way.
yeah, it's like I'm still doing it, but I'm gonna I'm gonna work some story stuff in there so it's not as bad. But I still like I
That
finished
doesn't
that
make it
book, and
better.
because yeah, I finished the book to finish it, but I won't be reading the rest of it because I really don't want like if you cut out the amount of ranting this guy did about social and hierarchy structures and stuff like that, it would have been like I don't know, 50,000 words shorter, right?
It's kind of like a video game where 40% of it is cutscenes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so
Pajima.
So, in answer to your question, DK, I would say that if it's part of the characterization and it doesn't hijack your story, then you should be okay. If you've got like a beta reader who kind of like what I'm saying, like this happens like with such high frequency, I dislike your main character. And I mean, if you want people to dislike your main character and that's the objective, then cool. Then don't change your story. But if you're like, I want them to be likable, and people like me are like, I want to kill them, right? Maybe think
Well,
about it.
it's like when I do have those moments of weakness, I'll call them. Uh, I'll like go back and be editing, and then I'll look at what I have written, and I'll be like, "This is some of the cringiest nonsense I've ever seen." And
I'm gonna send you a page from the latest 007 book to snap you back out of it. You'll get a great perspective of this real quick. You'll get it. Trust me. It's horrible.
I mean, I do snap myself out of it, but the thing I was like, how do I prevent myself from having this moment?
Nope,
Oh, okay.
you're still
Now
getting the
there's
pill. You're still getting
right
the pill.
here. Right here, there's a. I'm gonna direct your attention to your keyboard. Right above the arrow keys, you're gonna see delete end and page down. I would highly recommend that you consider that delete key if you've got to rectify that in your manuscript.
Yep.
Ouch.
So get it out of your system and then delete it when you're done.
So, aside from that, I can't really think of anything that has to do with world building.
I would research subtlety, allegory, and try to research whether or not someone has already done the same thing you're doing. That way you can try to emulate. That way you can try to emulate some of the techniques, while still doing it in your own words. You know what I mean? Because this is one of those things where we can talk to you about it all day, but like we can't do it for you. So it's more of a concept than anything. The only thing we can really do is show you places where it's been done well. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. I need to get better at asking questions. Anyways, thank you.
Well, I don't think it was that, but I'm going to move you to the audience now. Black, I'll bring you up to yell at Ritter. You have something to add.
He's not even there. You.
Thank you. Because I've been pulling off my weave and these heels and these earrings.
Oh my God. He's doing the bit.
I'm sorry. I love Ritter to death because he reminds me of a younger me. But at the same time, it's like I am cursed by the power of the ability to quote unquote help other people versus help myself. It's like my Achilles heel is I can't do things for myself. Because I know I've talked to you and I mentioned it to him. If you want to quote reference characters or world builds or similar situations for your story, look at something that you feel relates to what you're doing at the core of it. And that was the only thing. No, you're not.
Oh, wait. I figured it out. I figured out how to say this. Oh my God. It took me a while. So figure out a way to recreate the events you're seeing in the real world using other things in your story. They have the names and the factions have to be different. You have to swap out the names of each variable. And you also have to add in some other context. That way it serves as a red herring to what you're actually referring to. And again, I've used this word probably 3 times. That way, it's delivered in a more subtle and allegorical way. So yeah, there you go. You're still gonna have to find examples because, like, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was. Cause I mean, what you call his name? If I don't know if I'm gonna say this properly, but like saying if you wanted to have a character who is quote the spirit of vengeance against like a group of people who do wrong. I think you mentioned earlier Punisher, in a sense, but he's more of a like out there vigilante regardless. But then you have
They're all
people
vigilantes.
like the Spectrum. They are, but at the same time, they're not because they all work on a different playing field too, at a certain extent. And some of them are like limited by both the concept of their character or the concept of their world's power system for that character. But just the point though is like that's the only thing I just try to tell Ritter because it's like you can go and make mistakes. You don't need your work to be perfect. You don't need to be caught up on page one all the time. Make page one. Don't like it. Move on with the rest of the story. Because the worst thing about us as writers and artists is that if we get too hung up on that one chapter or that one prologue, we will get nowhere. So that was the only thing I really wanted to tell Ritter. Like I said before, find something that speaks to you. Use it as a blueprint or a reference point and try to work your story with that. And then if you make the first chapter and you don't like it, that's fine. You have something down. Move on to chapter 2. Move on to chapter 3. You don't need to finalize everything in one sitting or the same sitting over and over again. Just run it through. And then when you're done, you're like, oh snap, I'm finished. Now let me look at it all over. Because I can tell you right now, Ritter, when you finish something, you will be overwhelmed with the sense of I don't know what the word is called.
Accomplishment.
It's like completion exhaustion because it's like you finish something and your entire body kind of like just like goes boneless and you mentally feel like you're done and you're like
It's like those under the influence commercials.
no, it really is. It really is. I think I was mentioning this to Miss Carroll when I didn't finish that thing about the Romans. It's like when you get that high and you're riding that high and you're like, yes, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. We are unstoppable. It's like when you get to that moment where it's like that high kind of just hits that like straight downhill. It's like your entire body literally resets itself because you're like, okay, now what? And trust me, when Ritter gets that feeling, he will be plagued by wanting to know exactly what to do next to every minute fashion, I promise you. But apart from venting at Ritter because I love him so much, mwah, long story cut short is so I covered the isekai concept and I mentioned that to Miss Carroll. There was one last thing I wanted to ask, and it is kind of I think it bleeds into everything I've asked so far, Miss Carroll.
Mm-hmm.
So and I've told this to Venom because this is my Achilles heel, and I will say I'm similar to Ritter on this part. I am almost always stuck, and I say this respectfully, stuck because of cultural or racial situations involved in my storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I have literally tried to quote, reverse something and look at it that way, but I always get caught up on the cultural indifferences and the racial indifferences. And I say this because I know that there are cultural and racial indifferences that will have to tag in some small way to a character or a world building situation.
It's an inevitability. It's an inevitability.
It is, unless you do, like she mentioned earlier, the great equalizer situation, which is pretty much a situation that kind of like smacks race mostly to the side in favor of survival. Or just get
Well, I mean, it doesn't completely. Okay. It stops infighting. The racism then gets directed at whatever the threat is.
you Americans stop messing up my computer. Yeah, so no, that's kind of the point though. It's like, but this is something unfortunately because of the modern day writing spiel, it's kind of like over blanketed a lot of my older readings and my older, go throughs of stories. I I did send you that video. There's a man in the woods, right? Right, Venom.
I do not think you have.
Okay. No, but that's kind of my point. It's like trying to see past race is very hard, and mostly because I realize, and maybe Miss Carroll can help me with this. I realize that when it comes to like certain cultures in America, they're not exactly like dropped in with a quote peaceful or a more neutral like playing field the way other cultures are.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to making a story where you could have like an imaginative or a kind of like neutral playing field, it's hard to have it. So I guess this is kind of my point, is just asking what are just a few ways, if not through the great equalizer, to make neutral
Yeah.
playing fields for like
God dang it. And sorry to jump in. It's not about seeing past race or cultural differences. It's about accepting them, and that's where um, I don't want to bring. This is not a political lecture or anything, but that's where certain groups get mixed up, right? That's why they take such umbrage at the mere mention of cultural or racial differences, because they themselves have not accepted them. Like cultural and racial differences are biological and conceptual facts uh, of the human experience.
yes,
So what you have to do along with those people is accept the fact that it's going to happen. And honestly, for the people who get offended, you just kind of have to let them sit on that salt. I'm not even I'm not gonna lie to you. You just have to let them deal with that inner struggle by themselves.
So I don't think I have like
yes,
uh I don't think I have like a great answer to your question, but I can, I guess, give you my viewpoint on it, because the thing is that no matter what you do or how you try to depict things, there's always going to be a Karen that's going to get upset for the sake of somebody else,
There
right?
you go.
So that will happen, but the thing is that, okay, so here's my example, right? I've lived overseas, I've been in various countries, and occasionally I will run into somebody who's either like a xenophobe or something like that, right? Um, so,
mm-hmm.
uh, and although people like to say white people don't experience racism, like, when I was in Japan, 100% it was a thing. Um, so,
That
but,
was funny.
but the thing is that I want to say it's going to be in the dialogue, right? So when I was in Japan and I would get into an argument with a Japanese person about something, it would be completely factual based. Like, no, that's not what happens because of X, Y, Z. And like, well, you're a stupid white person. What the fuck do you know, right? Like they would do stuff like that. I've got a friend, and I'm on really good terms with him, and he's an islander. And one of the things he always tells me is like, "You freaking Caucasians in your ranch, right?" And I'm like, "What about it, right?" And he doesn't mean it like in a bad way. He's playing at it, right? And in my
Mm-hmm.
seat, I've never been offended by it, right? Because one, I love ranch. I can't deny the fact ranch is delicious. I will dump it on fucking everything, right? Like mainline that shit, give it to
Oh, you
me,
meant
right?
Lord.
you meant the sauce. I thought you
Yeah.
like meant like home on the ranch kind of thing.
No, no, he was talking about the
Uh,
condiment, my friend. He was talking about the condiment. So he was like, you Caucasians in your ranch
Okay.
dressing, like I can't stand this, right? And at this point, for him and me, it's just a joke, because I'll tell him like, yeah, I'm making a burger, and he's like, yeah, what kind of burger? It's like, I don't know, but I'm gonna cover it in ranch, right? And he's like, ah, right? Um, so for him and me, it's a meme, and we do that kind of thing back and forth, and it's funny, right? Now, I'm pretty sure if somebody who doesn't know me and him comes in on the middle of that conversation, they're gonna be very confused,
you're
right?
gonna go to the hospital and write ranch on your recommended meds card. They're
Yeah,
gonna
I
put
mainline
ranch
it
in your
right there.
IV.
I lost all my blood. I need the ranch. This is how I'm so pasty pale. Okay,
We,
this is how
we
this
have
works.
we have morphine. Do you have ranch? Do you have?
I need ranch.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Um,
Um.
Miss Carroll, Miss Carroll.
What?
I do want to just say one thing though. It's mostly because that is close to what I was asking. There is just kind of like missed, and
Mhm.
that was it's not so much that it's the people, because in all honesty, I've kind of gotten past the people problem.
Mhm.
It's more like I guess you could say the story setting problem I'm having issues with. because it's like I said before. It's like you could make a story about a alien guy who comes from you know Krypton, or a rich guy who loses his parents and he becomes a vigilante of the night, or a girl who comes from an island and she becomes the leading Wonder Woman of the world. But I think the hardest problem I've been having, and this is kind of why I was mentioning more for like a neutral situational, is mostly because in writing mentally, it's not easy having a kind of like neutral standpoint because of history or because of like, you know, the culture of people when it comes to like putting them into situations. It's why even with isekai, I know that these are like Japanese oriented stories in a sense. So it's like for them, it it's gonna mostly be related to Japanese culture, even if some of us might not see it that way. But
Hmm.
when it comes to like making a book about black people doing certain things, it becomes hard.
I own dogs. Please continue.
Oh God, there was a joke in
No,
there.
no,
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
I think I told you before. I have a huge fear of dogs, so it's like usually whenever I hear them, it's like I kind of get this insta freeze, so my body kind of like goes cold. But no, no, I think that was all I was asking mostly. But I do respect what she said because that does help me also focus on the point of like, if you don't like it, say la vie. Thank you. But yeah, it's like it's just the fact that in writing, especially because cultural, unfortunately, it still does play a weird lag tag onto it. It's like trying to do it from a neutral perspective point is like the hardest part for me because finding neutral perspective points even from African culture is almost impossible because it's like with African culture you have tribalism, you have like the cultural monarchy system of like I would say like the alliance does in Fire Emblem, where a group of head leaders do control a certain region, or it's a more war torn kind of situation and it can be very very dark. And it's like even if you have the more peaceful settings, like those peaceful settings are very archaic, past the quote European version of archaic. So it's like I guess one thing I was asking her is like, are there situations in general people can just throw out there to make a story neutral? Because that's the hardest thing for me to kind of like get my head around without anything shy of a zombie apocalypse or an alien invasion, if you know what I mean.
No, that's the answer. No. And the reason is because one of the flaws about humans is that whether we like it or not, we look for differences in each other, and then we try to focus on those differences. And it doesn't even have, and it can be something so micro. Not that I like using microaggression as the term, but one thing that, like women, for example, when women encounter other women, one of the first things that we do is we do a physical assessment. That's my secret. That's your friendly neighborhood woman secret for the week.
Stop
That
it.
we'll meet and we'll look at each other and we're gonna be like, "How's your hair? Did you do your makeup? What's your shirt look like? Are you dressed to present today? Like, are you wearing heels? What kind of heels you wearing? Right? Like, we're doing stuff like that. And we'll note like those little kind of differences. Not so much to like kind of henpeck, although some women will do that. But it's just like that physical assessment of like, who are you and how am I going to encounter you? Last night I actually went to church and I encountered an older woman. And she like did like that once over on me. And let me tell you, this lady and her direct eye contact like put me in my place. I was like, whoa. Um
That'll do it. That'll do it. I'm sorry. That'll do it.
yeah, I was
You
like,
don't
oh
play with
man.
old church biddies. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I like I hadn't even said anything to her. I was just kind of like, "Hey, nice to meet you." And she like looked me over and made eye contact and I was like, "I cow to you. I'm just going to sit down and mind my own business." Right? Um and like there's no animosity in that, right? But that was just something that naturally happened. And I don't think you're going to get away from it. If you're writing a story and you feel that that kind of needs to be part of it in some shape or form, or if you're writing and it happens organically, then just let it happen. And the thing is that if you read it back and you don't like it, you can kind of do like some edit tweaks on it.